What is going on, everybody? I go by Philly Mike, and this is the Philly Talk Podcast. Today, we got a special guest, but before we get into that, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also turn post notifications on so you know when I drop some content or go live. And also, PTP, smash the like button for your boys so we can push this out to other Philly fans. But with all that being said, let's introduce our special guest. I'm going to let him take it away. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'm Zach Berman from The Athletic, where I cover the Eagles. Thanks for asking me to come on.
Hey, thanks for coming on. So, crazy offseason for the Eagles, wouldn't you say?
Well, it really just started, right? So we're what, a few weeks in, and a coaching change already, quarterback controversy. So a lot going on. There's still much that's unsettled, and it's going to be an interesting few months here in Philadelphia.
I agree 100%. So let's start with the biggest headline, and that is the new head coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Sirianni. What was your take on that hire, and what did you think about the introductory press conference?
Well, I'll start with the second question first. I didn't make too much of the introductory press conference relative, I guess, to the outside. And the reason is it was a relatively difficult spot there, obviously being in an empty auditorium, and really taking some of the bullets that for decisions that haven't been made. That being said, that's part of the job, right? And deciding who the quarterback is, for instance, he's a big part of that. He's the head coach, and he's a spokesperson for the team. I do think, though, that Jeffrey Lurie should have been taking questions there. Jeffrey Lurie, it was his decision, and I understand he gave the opening statement explaining what went into the decision. But I do think there were questions about the process, about what led to choosing Nick Sirianni, that he could have taken questions on. And as far as Nick, look, if he's I didn't pay as much attention to the delivery as the content, and I frankly thought he could have given us more in terms of the content. He chose to be vague. He chose to be ambiguous, and that's his prerogative. That's the organization's prerogative. But I also think he could have addressed some of those questions or answered some of those questions differently, and he could have given more substance and explained his philosophy in a different way than he did. So it's still so early. I don't want to overstate the introductory press conference, and I'm looking forward to many more chances to talk to him. As far as the other part of the question, in terms of what I make of the hire, it still is a little soon to say that as well. You know, I think that when you look at Jeffrey Lurie and his history, he clearly prefers offensive coaches who have a background in working with quarterbacks, right? Now, I don't think anyone watched the Colts and said, we need that offense, right? But that being said, you're not hiring a system, you're hiring a person. And I've spoken to a lot of people who know Nick Sirianni, who've worked with him, who've played for him, and they have a lot of good things to say, very comparable, frankly, to what Jeffrey Lurie said, in terms of the way he cares about his players, in terms of the way he cares about the people around him. So I think there are qualities there that you like, and certainly he's worked with some very good football minds, and the relationship with Frank Reich is something that I know the organization valued. That being said, I think that there were a lot of candidates out there that they either didn't talk to or that they didn't hire, and you're always going to weigh Nick Sirianni against those other candidates.
Hey, that's perfectly said. I agree. The take I get from Eagle Nation is they either love it or they hate it. There's no in between. And to me, it's like, how could you love it or hate something? There's a lot of unknown. There, like you said, he has the qualities, being a guy who's been under the Frank Reich. His whole family is coaches. He expresses how much it's in his blood. He talks about accountability, and he's trying to me to say his philosophy is yet to be figured out, for the simple fact that we don't know what this team is going to present, and he's going to try to play to the player strength. And that's what grabbed me in. We got players on this team who do things well that I didn't see utilized last year, whether it was, you know, Doug Peterson not being able to get it out of them, the play calling, a lot of things going on. But hey, I'm going to give Nick Sirianni the benefit of the doubt. You know, welcome to Philadelphia. With that being said, how do you feel about the young pieces he's putting around him when we talk coaching staff? all the new hires, quarterback coach, defensive coordinator, passing game analyst, and offensive coordinator.
Yeah, so it was an interesting approach Nick took. You see first-time coaches, particularly younger coaches, often compliment themselves with a veteran voice on the staff, right? You know, when Sean McVay was hired by the Rams, for instance, his defensive coordinator was Wade Phillips. And you've seen that a few different times. It's not apples for apples, but Matt LaFleur, when he went to the Packers, he hires Mike Pettin as his defensive coordinator. Mike Pettin only had a year of coaching experience, but of head coaching experience. But nonetheless, he did not build that type of staff. It's more young up and comers, and there is merit to that. There's a lack of experience somewhat in the staff, but I've heard very good things about Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator. As far as the offensive staff, it's interesting when he went with Shane Steichen as the offensive coordinator, and they obviously have that background with the Chargers. I look at it more when you hire an offensive coach. I like bringing in people from different systems and trying to kind of mold the system that
Blend
way.
it.
Yeah, well, that's a better word. Blend it. Well said. And I think you look at Brian Johnson, the quarterbacks coach. That's an example of that. That's someone who Nick Sirianni didn't have a background with. I like that type of hire. When you look at in 2016, when Doug Peterson put his staff together, Frank Reich, John DeFilippo, they came from different coaching backgrounds. He kept Jeff Stoutland and Deuce Staley, and that 2017 offense was really a blend of what all those different coaches brought to Peterson's system, and so that jumped out to me that he went with someone who he has that much familiarity with. But I do think the symbiosis in terms of play calling is something that they obviously want.
Yeah, but I definitely agree. Different eyes, blending different offenses together, that can go a long way. You don't want to get too reliant where you guys are feeling the same thing, because if you're stuck in that rut, and that's what I think Frank Reich did for Doug Peterson. People want to say that when Frank Reich went away, our offense went away. He was a great mind. I wish we could have kept him. I mean, Josh McDaniels dipped on the Colts, so that's the reason we were in that rut. But Doug Peterson was calling the plays in 17, but he had that guy that he trusted who actually had a different mindset when it comes to play calling, who he could lean on. Maybe that's why we were more balanced with the run attack. In the situational football, Doug Peterson started to fail last year, at least through my eyes. I think that was his biggest downfall, the situational football, refusing to run the ball. But enough about Doug Peterson. So
yeah, but well, I'll just jump in. I disagree a bit in terms of the run. Frankly, when you look at 2017, a lot of times they ran. It was because they were playing with the lead, right? They were often ahead. They were running late in games. There were a few games that was different. The Chargers game, for instance, comes to mind, where they really kind of beat you on the ground. But the situational football, I think you hit it on the head there. When you look at what they did third down and red zone in 2017, that was huge. And that has gotten away from them a bit here. Now, is it the influences on the coaching staff, or was the quarterback playing at such a high level in 2017, and that it hasn't been the case here, and clearly not the case in 2020?
Oh, yeah, I definitely won't blame it all on Doug Peterson. This guy right next to me has a lot of blame in 2020. Again, I don't think that's really who he is, but it's a wait and see, because to go from up here to down here, I mean, that's huge red flags, whether you want to blame the play calling or not. I mean, Doug Peterson wasn't making him decide to throw in a double coverage. He wasn't forcing him to fumble the ball. So there's things that Carson got to clean up himself. You hear the reports about him being coachable, but let's get into that quarterback controversy a little bit. Nick Sirianni's been asked by everyone who can ask him, whether it's the introductory press conference, whether it's Jeff McClain 101, Dave Spadaro 101, he can go on WIP, and there's one question that keeps coming. What's going on with the quarterback competition? Is there a quarterback competition? Do you have a starter? And he kept trying to make it vague. He does preach competition throughout everywhere, and that's what you want when you got a new staff in. You got to evaluate and all that stuff. But do you believe there's actually going to be an actual competition, or do you think it's more of a ownership? They're going to pick the quarterback.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily ownership picking the quarterback per se, but I certainly think that when Nick Sirianni and the other candidates sat down, what's your plan with Carson Wentz, right? That's a big part of this. the reality is this: Carson Wentz is on a $128 million contract. Hasn't even kicked in yet, right? It kicks in this season. Now, perhaps there is too much baggage there with Carson, with the organization, that they've lost faith, that they want to move on from it. My interpretation when they hired Nick Sirianni was that this is someone who was here to help get Carson right, that this was a clean start for Carson. There was such an organizational investment, both in terms of resources and dollars, that it behooves them to try to figure out how to fix him. When they were when Nick Sirianni was non-committal to Carson and really said very little about him upon being hired, that surprised me a bit, because I thought this could be a chance to try to reconcile with Carson. That being said, perhaps it's deliberate from the organization's perspective, whether you want to call it tough love, whether they don't want to kind of cater to Carson at every step. Maybe it's that. Maybe they want him to compete. I think it will be very messy this offseason if you have Carson and Jalen Hurts competing for the job. If Carson Wentz is back, my guess is you need to make Carson Wentz the starter. I know that that's not consistent with this message of competition. I'm curious how that will play in the locker room. I just think with the investment they've made in him, right, that if you bring him back, you're bringing him back because you believe he can be the franchise quarterback. This isn't 2013 with Nick Foles and Michael Vick, right? This is a guy who you drafted number 2 overall, who you made those trades for, who you gave that contract to, you let the Super Bowl MVP walk, you fired a Super Bowl winning coach, okay? If Carson's not your guy, then I think that decision must be made before they step on the practice field.
Hey, I agree. Again, and when you heard, I don't know if you comments on the Rich Eisen show, he pretty much, I don't think he slandered Carson or Doug's name too much. He kind of gave the 50% blame Carson and the coaching staff, but he kept using the word, or he used the word leadway, and the leadway got so far that coaching staff couldn't bring him in. And again, I think with Nick, I agree. Some tough love will go a long way, but it's also about the other guys in the locker room. Like, you can't ask your O-line, your receivers, your DBs to go the extra mile for you when they see that you're catering to Carson Wentz the way it looks like, the hire looks like it, this, that, and the third. But I do agree. Franchise quarterbacks do get treated differently. I mean, they all have egos. It's just that I think Carson's ego after 2017 got so high when he was that MVP style player, but it didn't translate to anything because of injury. And he has to realize he still has to work for everything that's coming to him because he hasn't really put it together. When you look at playoff wins, they're big when you start to put the greats and the greats and the greats. You know, Pat Mahomes been in the league for only this little bit of time, but he's gave you some playoff wins. He gave you a Super Bowl. Nick Foles, whether he's a journeyman or not, and I do not believe Nick Foles is nowhere near as talented as Carson Wentz when he's at his full potential, but he gave us something that is credible. So I think that it's going to be tough, but do you see a scenario where, you know, Jalen Hurts can sit behind Carson Wentz and we can go through the season, week 1, week 2, week 3 with the media? You know, he has one bad game and here we go. Nick Sirianni, are you going to pull him? Or why ain't Jalen Hurts playing? Or why ain't you using him more in the packages that Doug Peterson and Howie Roseman drafted him for? Do you see that being a situation?
Yeah, so a few things there. First off, to the point of Carson's ego, I can't necessarily say that one way or the other because that is subjective. But what I will say is that if you are paid like a franchise quarterback, if you're treated like a franchise quarterback, you need to play like a franchise quarterback, right? That's ultimately what happened with the Rams. You know, they moved on from Jared Goff because he wasn't playing like a franchise quarterback in their eyes. So that's kind of my piece there on Carson. As far as the quarterback controversy and if Jalen Hurts is behind Carson this year, look, they invite that. If they bring both of them back, they invite that. And when you talk about the questions from the media, as someone who's firing those questions at the coach Peterson last year and Sirianni this year, that comes with the territory. And those questions aren't asked if Carson Wentz plays like no one's asking if you're going to bench Carson Wentz when he's playing the way you expect him to play. Those questions came up this year because they were losing games and he wasn't playing well. The question came up in the press conference a few times because there is a decision to be made. If there was a coaching change a year ago, if there was a coaching change 1 year ago, that question wouldn't come up. Is Carson Wentz your quarterback going forward? It would have been assumed, right? Carson
Mhm.
Wentz has been benched. Ownership, general manager, and when I say that, Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman haven't definitively said Carson Wentz is our quarterback next season.
That's
And
true.
a matter of fact, what Jeffrey Lurie said is that the head coach is going to be involved in that decision. I'm summarizing there. So the head
Mhm.
coach is hired. The head coach gets that question. Part of Nick Sirianni's job is making those types of decisions. I'm not sympathetic when a coach or a general manager or an organization overall needs to make tough decisions. That's exactly what they're paid for. They're not paid. They're paid to make those organization defining decisions.
I agree 100%. Um, So let's talk about the roster a little bit. We know that what we got to play with, right now we sit at 53 million over the cap. We have to figure that out. Now that's one thing where I believe Howie makes his name is being able to figure out the little do's and don'ts when it comes to the cap restructure. And you already saw that a little bit last year. He restructured Fletcher's contract already. As soon as the season ended, he restructured Alshon and Malik Jackson. To me, that restructuring kind of shows that they might be June 1st designated cuts. You know what I mean? Try to get that money salvageable. They go about their business and we gain some money back. Do you see any other big names possibly being let go? I know Brandon Graham's is like $17 million to the cap. He's still under contract, but when you look at his age, how much he's going to be paid, do you see any of these guys restructuring, renegotiating? And the big name, Zach Ertz, needing to be either let go or traded because of the whole situation. What is your take on the roster and how many people we end up seeing back on the roster veteran wise?
Yeah, it's a fair question. As far as the cap, I'll say it's not the type of situation where they're going to wake up on, like March 15th and be surprised what their cap spot is. Like they know what they've been planning for this. They know what's going on. That being said, they have kicked a lot of contracts. They've kicked the can down the line on a lot of these contracts, and the Bills do at some point. They're not going to have the type of cap flexibility that they had in, say, 2016, the last time there was a coaching change, and they went out and they signed Rodney McLeod and they signed Brandon Brooks. Now, to Howie's credit, and not just Howie, there's a handful of people in the front office who deal with this. Jake Rosenberg, to their credit, they were able to create cap space that year. They made some trades. They traded Kiko Alonso, they traded DeMarco Murray. There were a few different things they cut D'Amico Ryans. I do think though that the burdensome contracts at the time were not nearly as significant. I should say traded a Byron Maxwell. Kiko's contract was not burdensome. But the most burdensome contracts at the time were not nearly what they are this year. So there are going to be veterans who they're going to move on from. There are going to be restructures. That is inevitable. And frankly, if you just look at the highest paid players on the team, there are going to be cap restructures. I think Zach Ertz, like you mentioned, he'll play elsewhere next year. Deshaun Jackson, he'll play elsewhere next year. So there are going to be those decisions. But I don't think they're going to catch the team by surprise. That's the best way I'll say it.
Yeah, I agree. And there is a couple people I think who's on the edge, like a Derek Barnett. He's in his 5th-year option. I believe he's 10 million, but we get all 10 million back. So, there's going to be some casualties. So, and that's the thing. You're going to lose some of these guys who, when healthy, that's also been an Eagles problem, injuries, but when healthy, been able to play at a high level. So we're coming into this season with a quarterback who, is starting to hit that prime-ish age. And we could be looking like, a bunch of young coaching staff, young players. Is that going to play possibly in the quarterback's mind, whether he's going to come back and feel more positive, like, what, we're going to fix this with the Eagles and go full steam. He's 28 years old. He wants to probably be in a better situation. Who knows? I'm not going to speak for him. But the roster is pretty hard to go by. But let's talk about this draft pick, the number 6 pick. Have you heard anything? Anybody's leaning towards anything with it, or what would you do? Would you try to use the number 6 pick, or would you want to move back to fill some of these holes and to get some younger contracts on here so we can get out of this cap trouble?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's as far as who they're going to land and what I'm hearing, a little early for that, right? The Senior Bowl was just this past weekend. These underclassmen, they really haven't had a chance to sit down with them yet, evaluate them yet. But you know who the top guys are. I think what the Eagles need more than anything else are blue chip players. If you look at the best players on their roster, 25 and under, there aren't that many of them. You can say Miles Sanders, Josh Sweat's up there, right? Jordan Mailata, perhaps. We'll see about Andre Dillard. But they really don't have.
That's sad to say. Jordan Mailata is the blue chip player coming as an undrafted or 7th round pick, and Andre Dillard, the 1st round pick. We got to see about that. That's scary.
So but like if you made a list of their best 25 and under players, it's a short list. And so what they need to replenish the young talent. Trading back could be advantageous for them. But if you look at and this isn't breaking news here, the hit rate when you're drafting at the top of the 1st round compared to the bottom of the 1st round is considerably different. Howie Roseman's best picks: Fletcher Cox, 2012; Lane Johnson, 2013. I would put Carson, 2016. Even if you go back, Brandon Graham, that eventually turned into a good pick, 2010. Those are all top half of the draft, right? So how far down are you willing to move? I like the idea of maybe picking up an extra 2nd or picking up a future 1st. But if you're drafting at number 6 and you think Jamar Chase can be a blue chip player, you think Patrick Surtain can be a blue chip cornerback, you need to be thinking in that type of direction. The other thing to consider here is that if you're not sold on Carson, if you're not sold on Jalen Hurts, and let's say Justin Fields is sitting there at number 6, right? Or let's say you fall in love with Trey Lance. How often are you planning to draft in the top 10? The best way to find a top quarterback is in the top half, is in the top 5, top 10. So if you get one of those players on the board there, you can't just categorically eliminate it because you have, at this point, Carson and Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, and that's scary just because I know every time I hear something talked about quarterback, I just hear quarterback factory in my head. I know how he has came out and said he regretted saying that, and shout out to him for taking that statement back. But yeah, you don't know at this point because Carson's silence has been weird to say. I mean, maybe it's for the best, but it also could be for the worst. So if you got a guy who's been silent and, Jalen Hurts is just waiting in the mist, like what's going to happen, he would love to be the starting quarterback, but it's not his decision. And he has some up and downs of the previous season. He got things he got to work on. But I agree with you. Your best opportunity to get that blue chip type player is picking at 6. And have you heard anything about they're leaning more offense or defense? I know Nick Sirianni spoke a little bit about possibly being more offensive heavy.
No, I mean, honestly, I think it's so soon in those evaluations, right? Like they just hired a coach last week. I think if you look at the board, who are the top players there? In a different year, I would say they would be heavy on like pass rushers, defensive linemen, just in terms of the organizational thinking. This is not the best year for that in terms of the top 10. There are some good offensive tackles, offensive linemen on the board that they could be considering there. But I'm not saying that they're leaning like one way or the other in terms of offense, defense. I think what you need to do is I think their organizational philosophy is going to be fairly consistent. They're going to build along the lines. They're going to value receiver and cornerback. They won't value linebacker. Like I'd be surprised if Parsons is their 1st round pick at number 6. They're not going to draft a running back early, let's say. So, I think you look at kind of organizational priorities as opposed to are they going offense or defense at that spot.
Yeah. And I would think it would be hard to see Jamar Chase on the board and not go that route. And it is going to be a fight between Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase. I think the Miami Dolphins are looking for a possible wide receiver. They pretty much got a sound team if they still believe in Tua. But that's going to be tough. Again, Devontae Smith having a Heisman type year or Heisman year could have put a damper on what people think about Jamar Chase. You don't see it. You don't think about it. He opted out, but that's all going to be interesting. But hey, thank you for coming on the show and giving us your take. You got any final thoughts? Let me ask you this. If you could decide who the Eagles take at 6 and all the big names are there, who you think would be there as most of the mock drafts dropped, who would you go? Would you go Jamar Chase? Would you go wide receiver, top 10 wide receiver, top 10 defensive back?
I would trade down, honestly, if that's what you're facing, and especially if I'm sticking with let's say Carson Wentz. If I'm sticking with Carson Wentz and there's a quarterback on the board, I'm trading down.
Oh yeah.
I'm finding a team that's good, that's going to go up for one of those quarterbacks. I would try to get into like that 9 to 15 range. If you can pick up a second round pick, and just increase your chances there. But yeah, I mean, if it's Jamar Chase, that's a great pick. In terms of the way he played in 2019,
Right.
he didn't play this past year. I think the interesting conversation that's going to come up when you talk about offensive skill players is Kyle Pitts. And the reason I say that is you're saying, well, you were just playing this two tight end dance for a long time with with Ertz and Goddard. Let's say they move on from Ertz this offseason. You're spending a top 10 pick on a tight end. I'm not saying that's a direction they'd go. I'm just saying Kyle Pitts can be a special type player, and he's kind of that versatile hybrid type where he can also be a big receiver. That being said, I think Chase would be a name to watch. Patrick Surtain is a name to watch there. So there are intriguing options, but if it was me on the board, and especially if a quarterback was there, I would trade back.
I agree. And that 9 to 15 spot, I think, is sweet because depending on who needs offensive linemen, who needs quarterbacks, you might be able to see a Kyle Pitts drop to like a 12, a 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I don't really think a Jamar Chase would drop, but look at CeeDee Lamb. Nobody thought that he was going to be sitting there at 17 for Dallas to take, who I still believe is probably going to be one of the best receivers in this draft. Shout out to Justin Jefferson, who is sitting right over there for us to take. I mean, who broke some crazy records. I think it was Randy Moss's rookie record he broke. Shout out to Justin Jefferson. But, man, I mean, Jamar Chase was that dog over there for LSU in 2019. So that would be interesting. Let me ask you one more question when it comes to the draft. Do you think that because the fact that there's no combine, the fact that so many players opted out, you think there's going to be a lot more like random decisions? Like if this guy played a senior year, if this guy had a combine where you can see how fast, because some people get picked, some people move up the board because, wow, look at his 40 time, or wow, look at his long jump, his shuttle run, his benching. So do you think that's going to make people, kind of second guess and people slide because of the lack of seeing these players play their senior year / no combine?
It might, I mean, you have less information now. Sometimes more information doesn't necessarily make for better decisions. I would guess and I'm not saying this based on any evidence or talking to anyone. The hit rate, well, it could be the same as it was before. It's just, there's less information when you make these picks. It's really hard to say. A lot of it, frankly, has to do with not just the evaluation you make, but what type of situation are they coming into? How are they put into your system? How are they coached? The player's personality, the player's health, all things that maybe you don't see when you're watching the tape. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious with that as well, but it's hard for me to say one way or the other at this point. It is something that, as the draft gets closer, I'll talk to more people about and have a better answer for you.
Yeah. And like I said, my biggest example would be like Devontae Smith. 2019, he played with Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, guys who went in the top 20 picks, or in the first round, I should say. And you've seen a guy like Jamar Chase, who had Justin Jefferson, who also went in the first round, but he was the top dog over there. So if we're looking at 2019, Jamar Chase is head and shoulders above Devontae Smith. But now, because of him not playing, teams see what Devontae Smith was able to do with the injury to Jalen Waddle, and boom. I mean, now he might be the number 1 wide receiver picked up in this draft, and Jamar Chase might fall a couple just because of, not there. They forget about you for a little bit. But this is going to be interesting. Like I said, we're just starting this Eagles off season. We got money problems, trade problems, quarterback controversy, and hey, when are we going to get top? It's not often we pick in the top 10, like you said. So this is going to be a very interesting draft, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Do you have any final words?
I'm sorry. I really got to run, Mike. I'm sorry, man.
No, you're perfectly
I
fine.
got something I got to jump to. Yeah, I
You're
appreciate it.
good. With all that being said, thanks for everybody for watching. Look to talk to you soon, Zach Berman, and we out. Peace.